Not all family heirlooms are treasures. Some are warnings, reminders of things best left forgotten. I never paid much attention to old family stories. They were just tales, half-truths passed down like faded photographs, distorted by time and memory. But that changed the day I visited my great-grandmother. She was 98 years old, sharp as ever, living alone in a weathered farmhouse on the outskirts of a quiet Iowa town. I hadn't seen her in years, but something about that visit felt different. It wasn't just the isolation of the place or the way the air seemed unnaturally still. It was the bell, the rusted, silent bell hanging from the wooden post in the backyard. It looked ordinary enough, but the way my great-grandmother's eyes lingered on it, the way she flinched at its mere mention, I knew then that it wasn't just an ornament. That bell held a secret, a family secret buried deep in the past. And I was about to uncover it. I remember the drive well. Long, open road stretched ahead of me, lined with endless fields of corn swaying in the wind. The sky was wide, too wide, like it could swallow you whole if you stared at it for too long. Every few miles, I'd pass an old farmhouse, some well-kept, others abandoned, their windows dark and empty like missing teeth in a grin. There were no billboards, no gas stations, just miles of land and a feeling that time had slowed down. It had been years since I last visited my great-grandmother. She was 98 now, still living alone in the same house she'd been in since before my father was born. I wasn't even sure why I had decided to make the trip. Maybe it was guilt, maybe curiosity. Maybe some things just pull you back, whether you understand why or not. The turnoff to her place was easy to miss, just a narrow dirt road between two towering oak trees. My tires crunched over the gravel as I drove up the long driveway, past a weathered barn leaning slightly to one side, its paint long faded. An old tractor sat rusting in the grass, forgotten. And then, further back, near the tree line, I saw it. A bell. It was mounted on a curved metal crook, standing alone as if it had been placed there for a reason. It was old, rusted, and silent, but something about it made my stomach twist. It wasn't large, wasn't anything special at first glance, but it felt off. Like it didn't belong, like it was watching. I pulled up in front of the house, cutting the engine. The house itself looked the same as I remembered. Wooden, two-story, its wraparound porch sagging slightly under the weight of time. The windows reflected the overcast sky, making them look more like mirrors than glass. The screen door creaked open before I even made it up the steps, and there she was. My great-grandmother was small, fragile-looking, but her eyes were sharp, the kind that saw through you, past the small talk and niceties. She smiled when she saw me, but there was something else there too, something behind the welcome, something I didn't understand yet. "You finally made it," she said, her voice warm but tired. "Come in before the storm hits." I glanced up at the sky. There was no storm. Just thick gray clouds hanging low, unmoving. I stepped inside, shaking off the strange feeling creeping up my spine. I told myself it was just the long drive, just the exhaustion settling in. After all, there was nothing unusual about an old bell standing alone in a field. Nothing unusual at all. I don't know what made me look at it again. Maybe it was the way the afternoon light hit it just right, catching in the corner of my eye. Maybe it was some deep part of me that already knew something wasn't right. Either way, I turned my head, and there it was. The bell. It wasn't the same as before. At least, it didn't look the same. When I first pulled up, it had been old, rusted, dull, the kind of thing that looked like it hadn't been touched in decades. Now, it was different. The metal shone, clean, as if someone had come along and scrubbed away years of neglect. The rust was gone. Completely gone. I stared at it for a long time. Too long. My brain kept trying to make sense of it, running through possibilities. Maybe my great-grandmother had it cleaned. Maybe a neighbor had done it. Maybe, somehow, I had just seen it wrong before. But none of those explanations felt right. I'd seen it. I knew what I had seen. And now it was different. A cold feeling settled in my stomach, but I shook it off. This was nothing. It had to be nothing. Still, I found myself watching it, half expecting something to happen, half daring it to prove me wrong. The wind moved through the fields, rustling the leaves of the trees nearby, but the bell didn't move. It just stood there, silent, waiting. I looked away, forcing myself to focus on something else. The porch, the house, the sound of my great-grandmother moving around inside. Normal things. Things that made sense. And yet, as I stepped through the front door, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had just walked away from something I should have been paying attention to. It had been years since I last visited, but the moment I stepped inside, the scent of the house wrapped around me like an old, familiar quilt. Wood polish, something faintly floral, and the unmistakable warmth of a place that had seen generations come and go. "About time," my aunt muttered from the kitchen, barely looking up from whatever she was stirring on the stove. That was her way of saying she was glad I was here. No hugs, no fuss. Just that dry remark and the way she set an extra plate on the counter without asking if I was hungry. My mother was already seated at the table, thumbing through an old photo album, half listening to my uncle who was going on about something. Crop prices, maybe, or a neighbor's new truck. It didn't matter. Conversations here had a way of filling the air without needing much from you. And then there was her. My great-grandmother. She sat at the head of the table, the way she always had, small and still, her hands folded neatly in her lap. 98 years old and sharper than any of us, though today there was something different. She wasn't speaking, wasn't even watching us. Just staring off toward the window, eyes locked on something none of us could see. "Grandma," my mother tried, touching her arm lightly. "You all right?" That brought her back. Sort of. She blinked, as if shaking off a thought she didn't want to admit to having. Then she turned to me, her lips curling into the smallest smile. "Well," she said, voice soft but steady. "Look at you. All grown up." I smiled back, but something about the way she said it made my stomach knot. It wasn't the usual remark about how much older I looked. It was something else. A weight behind the words. I pulled out a chair and sat across from her. "It's good to see you, Grandma." She nodded, but her fingers twitched in her lap. Restless. Like she was waiting for something. Or dreading it. Aunt Linda set a cup of tea in front of her, but she didn't touch it. Didn't even glance at it. Instead, she shifted her gaze past me, toward the door. Toward the yard. I turned slightly, following her line of sight, but there was nothing. Just the swaying of the wheat in the distance. The old barn. And, of course, the bell. I faced her again, about to ask what was on her mind, but she beat me to it. "You looked at it, didn't you?" My heart kicked in my chest. It wasn't the question itself, it was the way she asked it. Like she already knew the answer. Like she knew more than I did. I swallowed. Looked at what? Her lips pressed together, and she shook her head, more to herself than to me. "It's all right," she murmured, almost too low to hear. "You were bound to." I wanted to press her to ask what she meant, but before I could, Aunt Linda set a plate in front of me, ending the conversation before it even began. "Eat," she said. "You drove all this way." And that was that. The conversation shifted, moving to safer ground. Stories of old family trips, complaints about the weather, the kind of small talk that filled the space without meaning much. But every so often, I'd glance back at my great-grandmother, and every time she wasn't listening. She was watching. Not us. Not the table. The window. And the bell beyond it. She waited until the others had gone to bed. That was how I knew whatever she had to say wasn't meant for just anyone. The house was quiet except for the faint ticking of the old clock on the wall. I sat across from her, the dim kitchen light flickering just enough to make the shadows dance. Her hands, veined and delicate, rested on the table, fingers tracing slow, invisible patterns against the wood. For a long moment, she said nothing, just breathed. Then, without looking at me, she spoke. "I was 8 when it happened," she said. "When my family was taken." My breath hitched, but I didn't interrupt. I wasn't always an orphan. People just like to say I was because it made things simpler. But I had a mother, a father, a little brother who followed me everywhere, even when I told him not to. Her voice softened for a second, as if the memory had warmed her, but it didn't last. And then, one night, they were gone. A lump formed in my throat. Gone how? She exhaled slowly, like they'd never been there at all. I shifted in my chair, feeling the weight of something unspoken pressing down on us. She went on. "It started with the bell." I swallowed hard. "My father rang it every evening at sundown," she continued. 3 times. No more, no less. It was something his father had done before him, and his father before that. "A tradition," he said. "Except it wasn't really that, was it?" Her fingers twitched against the table. It was a warning. The room felt colder. "That bell kept us safe," she said. "Or at least, that's what he believed. If it rang, it kept whatever it was at bay. The thing in the fields. The thing that watched." My skin prickled. She glanced up at me then, her faded blue eyes sharp despite her age. "You don't believe me." I opened my mouth, but she shook her head. "It's all right. I wouldn't believe me either." Silence stretched between us, thick and heavy. "That night," she said finally, "the bell didn't ring. My father was late coming in from the fields. My mother must have lost track of time. I don't know. I only remember the quiet." Her voice dropped lower. "And then, the whispering." My pulse quickened. "Whispering?" She nodded. "From outside. A sound like wind moving through the wheat, except there was no wind. Just voices. Too many of them. Too close." She blinked, lost in the memory. I was holding my brother's hand. He was shaking, but he didn't cry. I think he knew, even then. My throat felt dry. "We stayed in our room like we were told," she said. "Didn't move. Didn't breathe. And then, the door opened." I shivered. "It wasn't my parents," she whispered. "They were already gone." A chill ran down my spine. I don't know what took them. I don't know where they went. One moment, they were there. The next, nothing. She stared past me, like she could still see it. I only survived because I ran. Because I didn't look back. A long pause. Then she nodded toward the window. Toward the bell. "Someone's been ringing it again," she said. "Haven't they?" I hesitated. Her eyes met mine. "Then it knows you're here." I couldn't speak. Couldn't move. Because deep down, I already knew she was right. I wanted to call it nonsense. A story shaped by years of loneliness, memory eroding like old stone. I wanted to laugh, shake my head, tell her she'd had too much time to sit with old fears. And yet, I couldn't. Because I'd seen the bell. It should have been rusted, forgotten, just another relic in a place where time hardly moved. But it wasn't. It shone in the moonlight, edges clean, polished. Someone had been touching it. Someone had been ringing it. I thought about my family asleep upstairs, unaware. My father, who had already started talking about selling the land. My mother, who didn't believe in ghosts but still refused to sleep with the closet door open. My cousins, who would probably scoff at the idea of a haunted bell but wouldn't go near it after dark. What if she wasn't wrong? The thought sent a chill through me. If I ignored her, if I let myself believe it was just an old woman's ramblings, would it change anything? Would it mean I didn't wake up one morning to an empty house? Would it mean I didn't listen to the silence and realize, too late, that something had come? I ran a hand through my hair, exhaling slowly. There was a choice in front of me, even if I didn't want to acknowledge it. Walk away, pretend none of this mattered, or find out the truth. I could hear the wind outside, or maybe it wasn't the wind at all. Maybe it was something else. I didn't know. And that was the problem. Because now that I had heard her story, I couldn't leave it alone. I started with the old records in the attic, the ones my great-grandmother had tucked away in brittle folders and yellowed pages. The handwriting was faded, the ink bleeding into the fibers of the paper, but the names stood out. Names I recognized. Family members who had lived and died on this land. Some of the deaths were expected. Old age, illness, the things that took people in their time. But others didn't make sense. Children who had vanished without a trace. A mother who drowned in the well despite never being known to set foot near it. A man who walked into the fields one evening and was never seen again. The further back I went, the worse it became. Reports of disappearances. Stories whispered in the margins of old journals. And always, there was mention of the bell. The one mounted near the barn. The one that had always been there, long before my great-grandmother's time. It was a warning, some writings said. A barrier, others claimed. The bell was never to be touched unless absolutely necessary. If it rang without reason, it meant something had come. I sat there, surrounded by the weight of old paper and fading ink, my breath shallow. The bell had been rusted, unused, nothing more than a forgotten ornament, until now. Someone had cleaned it. Someone had made sure it was ready. And if the stories were true, that could only mean one thing. Something had been waiting. Something had been called. And my family was still here. I told them we had to go. I didn't explain it the way I should have. I was too frantic, too unsettled. The words tumbled out in a mess, and my great-grandmother just smiled the way she always did, as if she had already lived too long to be afraid of anything. My uncle laughed. My cousins rolled their eyes. No one took me seriously. So I stopped talking and started watching. At first, it was easy to dismiss. A door creaking open when no one was there. The sound of footsteps on the stairs in the dead of night. The flickering of a bulb, a misplaced object, a chill creeping through the house despite the warmth of summer. Small things. Things that could be explained. But then the nights grew heavier. I heard something outside my window, a rustling too deliberate to be the wind. I stared out into the dark, searching, straining my ears. And then, just barely, just enough to make my stomach drop, I heard the bell. A single chime. Soft. Faint. Almost hesitant. The next day, my great-grandmother seemed different. She was quieter, more distant. Her hands shook as she buttered her toast, and when I asked if she was all right, she just nodded without looking at me. I wanted to press her, but something about the way she held herself made my throat tighten. I let it go. The bell rang again that evening. This time, I saw the rope move. No one was there. By the third night, the air felt wrong, heavy, like something pressing down on my chest. I barely slept. Every time I drifted off, something woke me. A whisper, a footstep, the sensation of being watched. And then came the knocking. 3 slow, deliberate knocks on my bedroom door. I held my breath, frozen, waiting for whoever was there to announce themselves. But they didn't. They just stood there. I could feel them. I reached for my phone, my fingers unsteady. But before I could turn on the light, the door creaked open. Nothing was there. I didn't sleep after that. By the time the sun rose, I had made my decision. If my family wouldn't leave, I would end this myself. I didn't know what that meant. Not really. All I knew was that everything traced back to the bell. It had to go. I waited until everyone had gone to bed. Then, with a flashlight in one hand and an old axe in the other, I walked toward the barn. The night was silent, suffocating. Every step felt wrong, as if I were moving through something thick and unseen. When I reached the bell, I hesitated. Up close, it was beautiful, gleaming in the moonlight as though it had never aged. I didn't want to touch it, but I had no choice. The moment my fingers brushed the metal, the air shifted. I wasn't alone. I heard breathing, low, ragged, inches from my ear. The ground felt unsteady beneath me, the darkness pressing in too tightly. My skin crawled. Something moved behind me, slow and deliberate. I swung the axe. It struck the bell, a deafening clang splitting the night. And then, silence. For one terrifying moment, nothing happened. Then the wind howled, a violent force that sent me stumbling backward. The bell began to shake, its sound warping, twisting into something awful. I gritted my teeth, raised the axe again, and brought it down with everything I had. The bell cracked. And then, the screaming started. The bell was gone. Or at least, that was what I told myself as I stood there, gripping the axe, heart pounding in my chest. The metal lay in jagged pieces at my feet, its once polished surface now fractured and dull. The air was still. Too still. The wind that had howled moments ago had vanished, leaving behind a silence so absolute it made my ears ring. I wanted to believe it was over, that whatever had been tied to that bell had been severed along with it. But as I turned back toward the house, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. Not ended, just shifted. No one mentioned the noise the next morning. My family went about their routines as if nothing had happened. My great-grandmother sat in her chair by the window, her hands folded neatly in her lap. She looked relieved. Not happy, not at peace. Just relieved. She never spoke about the bell again. Neither did I. And yet, I kept waiting. Every night after that, I lay awake, listening. Even after I left the farmhouse, even after I returned to my normal life, I listened. For the creak of a door, the knock at midnight, the sound of a bell ringing in the distance. Because that's the thing about stories like these. You can destroy an object. You can tell yourself it's over. You can leave the place behind. But some things, once acknowledged, never really leave you. They wait. Some secrets are meant to remain buried. We like to think that uncovering the truth will set us free, that knowledge is always better than ignorance. But sometimes, the past is the past for a reason. Sometimes, the things we dig up don't stay where we put them. And sometimes, what we think we've left behind is only waiting for the right moment to return. Maybe the bell was just an object, just rust and metal, hammered into shape and given meaning by generations of superstition. Or maybe it was something more. Maybe it was a warning, a reminder, a tether to something that should have never been disturbed. I'd like to believe that destroying it put an end to everything. That whatever haunted my family is gone. That the silence that followed means peace, not patience. But even now, when I close my eyes, I still find myself waiting for a sound I hope I never hear again. If you've ever encountered something that made you question what's real and what's best left alone, I want to hear about it. Drop your thoughts in the comments, share your own stories, and let's see just how many of us have touched the edges of something unexplainable. And if you enjoyed this story, if you want more mysteries, more forgotten whispers from the past, make sure to like, subscribe, and stay with me. Because the world is full of stories like this. Some are told, some are silenced, and some are still waiting to be heard.